Good evening, welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Leith, and here are today's top stories. Britain won 65 medals at the Tokyo Olympics, making it the second most successful Olympics overseas. The Times newspaper says the Chinese regime is abusing a special visa scheme designed for Hong Kongers to send its spies to the UK. And Scotland lifts most of its COVID-19 restrictions, but masks are still required in some settings. Team GB arrived home from Tokyo today with 65 medals, their second most successful Olympics overseas. The athletes have high expectations for the next Games in Paris. NTD's John Robson brings us the story.
Team GB arrive home in London after their strong performance in the Tokyo Games. They brought home 22 gold, 21 silver and 22 bronze medals. A 65-medal haul meant fourth place in the table. This is their second most successful Olympics overseas after Rio de Janeiro 5 years ago. The next Olympics is less than 3 years away. England believes the young, talented team will be in great shape heading to Paris. Chair of UK Sport, Catherine Granger, says Team GB are striving to create a positive culture for athletes.
I'm thrilled that I think we are in a better place now, and I think we certainly haven't seen any drop-off in performance, and I would expect both to, if anyone was unconvinced before, hopefully would be convinced now.
Britain won medals across 23 sports, more than any other nation except the US. But Tokyo 2020 saw a medal decline in traditionally strong events for Team GB rowing and athletics. Joanne Robson, NTD News.
As the Olympics closed, the President and the International Olympic Committee described them in glowing terms. But experts question how successful the Games have been from a financial and health viewpoint. NTD's Eddie Aitken has this report.
Tokyo has closed the curtains on what should have been last year's Olympic Games. President of the International Olympic Committee, Thomas Bach, maintains they were a success. At the end of the Games news conference, he said he's not aware of any figure suggesting a connection between the event and the current surge in CCP virus cases in Japan.
This argument, and I can only refer to the comments there of, for instance, Prime Minister Suga, of Governor Koike, and many other experts who have made this clear, that there is no such influence, neither direct nor indirect.
But others do not share this view. A professor of public health and a specialist in epidemiology says the Games should not have taken place because of the risk of spreading the virus. Although he enjoyed watching the events on television, he says his view has not changed.
We should be postponing that till we have something to really celebrate, where there is real unity and fair play. And that's not the case at the moment. There's total disunity over having the Olympics. The people in Japan did not want it. Their health professionals did not want it. It's very expensive for them with very little upside.
It is difficult to put a figure on how much money the Games cost Japan, but Japanese government audits have put the bottom line at around £18 billion. Bach says the International Olympic Committee is also contributing to the budget.
And the IOC is contributing to the additional costs of the postponement by having created this envelope of $800 million US, for which again we had to take some bank credit.
But a sports finance expert says it's easier for the IOC to deal with the losses than the Japanese government. That's because the next Games is in only 3 years' time, with more Games planned. Whereas for Japan, the moment to profit from the Games has passed.
Japan and Tokyo domestically, as I say, this is a missed opportunity. They don't have the opportunity to show off Japan in the same way.
Because of the pandemic, the Tokyo Games were largely a TV-only event with no spectators at most venues. The Paralympics will follow from August 24th to September 5th. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
The Times newspaper says the Chinese regime is trying to send spies to the UK by abusing a special visa scheme designed to help Hong Kongers flee persecution. NTD's Costemenes has this report.
Chinese spies are pretending to be refugees to get into Britain. They're using a visa scheme that helps Hong Kongers escape persecution. That's according to a report by The Times. The newspaper quotes unnamed government sources, saying there are sleeper agents working for the Chinese regime, applying for British national overseas visas in Hong Kong. Benedict Rogers, chief executive of the NGO Hong Kong Watch, says the Chinese regime's alleged behavior is totally outrageous. He says the UK must tighten procedures in order to vet and screen out these spies. In response to the report, a Home Office spokesperson says there are safeguards in place throughout the application process to ensure it is free from abuse and helps those most in need. The BNO visa scheme was announced by Prime Minister Boris Johnson last July after Beijing imposed a draconian national security law on Hong Kong. It allows British national overseas or BNO passport holders and their family members to live, work and study in the UK. Under the new law, Hong Kong authorities have banned the annual vigil for victims of the Tiananmen massacre. The government also forced the pro-democracy Apple Daily newspaper to close and arrested its editors. Last month, the first person convicted under the national security law was jailed for 9 years. Critics said that the verdict set new limits on free speech in the former British colony. Many Hong Kong residents have chosen to take up the UK visa offer, leaving family and friends behind. Home Office figures show in the first quarter of this year, over 34,000 people applied for the visa. The government expects 150,000 Hong Kongers to arrive in the UK in the first year of the scheme. Costemenes, NTD News.
Scotland has today lifted most of its COVID restrictions, but in some settings, masks and social distancing are still required. NTD's Eddie Aitken has more on this.
Scotland lifted most of the COVID-19 restrictions on Monday. Legal requirements for social distancing and gatherings came to an end. All venues can now reopen. Hundreds of people queued to get into nightclubs when the clock struck a minute past midnight. Scotland First Minister Nicola Sturgeon tells Good Morning Britain she was nervous about the reopening, but thinks it's the right time. She also says she can't guarantee there will be no further lockdowns. Scotland is taking a cautious approach. Face coverings are to remain in some indoor settings, including public transport. Secondary school pupils and teachers need to wear masks indoors for up to 6 weeks after school's return. School staff must keep at least 1 metre away from each other and students. In healthcare settings, people still need to stay 2 metres apart. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
Hundreds of thousands of Belarusians took to the streets 1 year ago in the biggest challenge to Lukashenko's rule since he became president in 1994. With little sign that his grip on power is weakening, more and more Belarusians are subject to a life in exile. NTD's Trevor Piper has more on this.
It's been 1 year since the Belarus presidential election that was widely seen as rigged. Around 200,000 people marched through Minsk in protest. It was the biggest challenge to President Alexander Lukashenko's 26-year authoritarian rule. Police arrested more than 35,000 people and beat thousands. Hundreds are still in jail. 20-year-old Alexander Vilks and 40-year-old Tatiana Shuntava both fled in the autumn of 2020. They met in Lithuania and later moved to Gdansk, Poland, to find work.
I didn't choose the life I'm living now, but everything I did a year ago, I would do again. I'd even have done more and would have done it deliberately.
Both are still committed to working for freedom in Belarus.
We don't have the right, and we would betray ourselves and our people if we stopped fighting. We'd betray all those who are still held in prison.
But with Lukashenko still in power, there is disappointment.
I'm not sure I'd call it a mistake, but we did expect quicker results from our action. But with so many people, change cannot be so fast. We must accept we won't see quick results. We need to continue to fight.
But there is no forgetting the past. Vilk spent several days in prison where he was severely beaten by police. The Associated Press was there when he was released and reunited with his mother.
It's scary to imagine how deeply she was grieving because of this.
He says the pain will stay with him forever. The exiled Belarus opposition leader fled to Lithuania in August 2020. On Monday, she urged democratic countries to impose a new wave of joint sanctions on the regime.
We understand that sanctions are not silver bullet, but they will help to stop repressions, to release political prisoners. We are sure in this.
She said there should not be any dealings with the regime, which she calls criminal. Trevor Piper, NTD News.
The UK has imposed new sanctions on Belarus targeting trade with Belarusian state-owned companies, government finance and aviation. Lukashenko then responded saying London can choke on the new measures. Meanwhile, Poland reports a record number of migrants have crossed the border with Belarus since Friday. It comes amid accusations that Minsk is using illegal crossings to pressure European Union states. NTD's John Robson brings us the details.
Poland said on Monday it had detained almost 350 illegal migrants crossing the Belarus border since Friday. That's almost 3 times as many as during the whole of last year. The Polish border guard said the migrants were probably from Iraq and Afghanistan. Authorities accuse Minsk of hitting back at Poland for giving refuge to a Belarusian athlete who refused to return home from the Tokyo Olympics. The EU is scheduled to hold a crisis meeting next week over the surge of illegal border crossings from Belarus to Lithuania and Poland. This comes as tensions between the EU and Minsk continue to grow. Poland and Lithuania last week called on the EU to help them deal with the migrant wave. Lithuania accuses Belarus of using illegal migrants as a political weapon against EU sanctions imposed on Minsk. Lithuania said Minsk was flying in migrants from abroad and dispatching them into the EU. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko last week in turn accused Lithuania of fueling the migrant issue. He said Lithuania pushes migrants away at the Belarus checkpoints under the threat of weapons.
The latest events on our borders with Lithuania and Latvia are at least alarming. For us, such actions can trigger a conflict because we cannot allow violations of state borders.
Lithuania last week dismissed Belarusian reports that an Iraqi migrant had been found beaten to death after being turned away at the Lithuanian border. It described it as part of a hybrid war of disinformation being waged by Minsk. Lithuania has authorized its border guards to use force if necessary to turn migrants away. In the Lithuanian migrant camps, overcrowding increases.
No, Belarus are not using me. I don't care about Belarus. I don't care what's happened, okay? What I do today, it's my life, not Belarusians' life, yeah. You know what I mean? All these people here, they are doing that to get better life, not because Belarus are using me. No, I'm using Belarus, I can say that. This is the best word.
Lithuania officials estimate that more than 10,000 more migrants might try to arrive this year. Joanne Robson, NTD News.
The British Heart Foundation warns waiting lists for heart care could take up to 5 years to recover to pre-pandemic levels. The charity says a recent survey found more than 60% of adults with a heart condition avoided care during the pandemic, despite their condition worsening. Surveys and focus groups found fear of infection from the CCP virus and burdening the NHS were reasons for people putting off access to care. Many instead received care via a phone call. Most patients told the charity they felt digital and telephone appointments aren't suitable for all conditions. Even before the pandemic, 225,000 people in England with heart problems were on waiting lists. BHF says that in the first year of the pandemic, there were around 5,800 excess deaths. The charity says in the worst-case scenario, the backlog could more than double by next year. It predicted other scenarios would still mean a backlog of people on the waiting list. Still to come, wildfires in Greece continue for the 7th day. One pregnant evacuee says seeing the blaze was like watching a horror movie.
We are afraid, we feel lost, we feel abandoned.
That and more after the break. The burning of wildfires in Greece was like living in a horror movie, says one resident who was evacuated from the Greek island of Evia by ferry on Sunday. NTD's Kostas brings us this story.
Thousands of people have fled their homes on the Greek island of Evia as wildfires burned uncontrolled for a 6th day on Sunday. The fires on Greece's second biggest island ripped through thousands of acres of pristine forest. Dozens of villages were evacuated. Ferries took many to safety by sea. The flames engulfed homes in 5 villages, but the full extent of the damage was not immediately known.
We are afraid, we feel lost, we feel abandoned.
30-year-old evacuee Mina, who is pregnant, said seeing the blaze was like watching a horror movie.
You see the horror movie, you got afraid and you tell to yourself, okay, this is movie. But now this is not the movie, this is our real life. This is horror that we live for the last 1 week, almost 1 week.
Wildfires have broken out in many parts of Greece during the worst heat wave in 3 decades. Searing temperatures and hot winds create tinderbox conditions. Across the country, forest land has burned and dozens of homes and businesses have been destroyed. The Coast Guard has evacuated more than 2,000 people, including many elderly residents from different parts of Evia. More than 570 firefighters are battling 2 active blazes in the north and south of the island. Greece has deployed the army to help tackle the fires. Several nations, including the UK, France, Switzerland and Spain, have sent help. Kostas, NTD News.
Health Secretary Sajid Javid has requested the Competition and Markets Authority to investigate the pricing of PCR COVID tests. There have been ongoing complaints that the costs have been restrictive to families wishing to travel abroad. NTD's Neil Woodrow brings us the details.
Boris Johnson has been urged to cap the cost of private COVID-19 tests to prevent foreign holidays becoming a luxury open only to the wealthiest families. In a letter to the Chief Executive, Andrei Koselli, Health Secretary Sajid Javid asked the Competition and Markets Authority to conduct a rapid high-level review of PCR travel tests and recommend action to ensure travellers do not face unnecessarily high costs or poor service. The government lists providers on their website which meet minimum testing standards. PCR tests cost £75 on average, with the lowest at just £20, but more than 100 outlets are charging £200 plus. Lib Dem Health spokeswoman Munira Wilson said the party is calling on the government to cap the cost of PCR tests for international travel, scrap the VAT on tests and cut the red tape that is keeping prices high. Travellers with 2 doses of COVID-19 vaccine returning from green and amber list countries are required to take a PCR test on day 2 of their arrival back to England. This is also the case for those not fully vaccinated arriving back from green list countries. But those arriving back from amber list countries who are not double jabbed are told to take a second PCR test on day 8. The government says PCR tests are prescribed to enable genome sequencing to help monitor the progression of CCP virus variants, but recent reports reveal this may not be happening. In a Telegraph article last week, the chair of the Transport Select Committee, Hugh Merriman, said that across 3 weeks from July 1st, there were 7,000 positive tests from arriving international travellers, yet only 350 or 5% of those were sent off for genomic sequencing. Back in February, the figure was 50%. Neil Woodrow, NTD News.
France sees its fourth week of protests after the top court approved a COVID health pass that comes into effect today. A policy analyst predicts the new rules will eventually lead to an overwhelming defeat for the French president. NTD France correspondent David Vivez reports from Paris.
France's highest court on Thursday upheld a new law requiring the public to hold a health pass, saying it complies with the French constitution. Healthcare workers, as well as many other professionals, will have to get vaccinated against the CCP virus by mid-September. Protests took place across France calling for the court to rule against the health pass. According to policy analyst and media outlet director Eric Verag, the court's decision comes as no surprise.
The top court has mostly validated the health pass, but also gave munitions for people to defend themselves.
The court ruled against the dismissal of short-term contract workers who refused to take the shot. Beyond creating tensions between workers and employers, the law will need substantial effort to be implemented across different sectors.
If there is one thing to take from this, it's that the law will not bring order. On the contrary, the law will bring disorder, as it will be very complicated to have this law enforced.
Verag says the main takeaway from this decision is the impossibility of enforcing the health pass. He says this will be Macron's personal Waterloo, a reference to the historical battle that marked the defeat of French Emperor Napoleon.
President Macron pushed this law through very quickly, thinking this would be a victory. But as weeks pass, we understand that this was only a dream. The reality is very different, as the French elections are coming and this health pass will be a major defeat. I believe the resistance to the law will be so strong it won't be applied in the end.
Many calls to join the demonstrations are currently circulating on social media. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Hungary has taken a further step regarding the exposure of children to LGBT issues. It orders that children's books containing these themes are closed-wrapped, while books referring to gender reassignment are restricted from being sold near schools or churches. NTD's Kostamines has the details.
Hungary is starting to restrict public display of books that depict or promote themes relating to gender change. It includes books that contain explicit depictions of sexuality. It tells shops to sell them separately and bans the sale of them within 200 meters of a school or a church. Bookstores have also been ordered to close-wrap children's books seen as promoting homosexuality. It's the first of what is expected to be a series of directives following a law passed in June that bans the use of LGBT-related materials and materials seen as promoting gender reassignment at schools. Hungary Prime Minister Viktor Orbán says he aims to safeguard traditional Christian values from Western liberalism. Orbán has received considerable backlash against the recent law from various European Union members, with the head of the EU's Executive Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, calling it a disgrace. But the Hungarian Prime Minister wants to hold a national referendum to show public support for the new law. Same-sex marriage is constitutionally forbidden in Hungary, but the country does recognize civil partnerships. Orbán's government says this latest law protects children and leaves it up to their parents to educate them about sexuality. Kostamines, NTD News.
Now to a sport that made a jumping, grinding, and flying debut at the Olympics. To some, the newfound Olympic status of skateboarding offers a mainstream seal of approval to the once rebellious sport. But will it mean it loses its counterculture status? NTD's Eddie Aiken brings us this report.
Midday at South Bank Skate Park on the banks of the River Thames. As young skaters test their skills on its ramps and pipes, this concrete hideaway has been the beating heart of London's skateboarding scene for over 40 years.
You come to a skate park, you may be in a town you've never been to before, and you've already got everything in common with these people, right? With whoever's here, you sort of vibe with them, make friends immediately.
London's Somerset House is staging an exhibition on skateboarding and its culture. The organisers say the pandemic saw UK skateboarding experience its biggest uptake for decades.
Worldwide, every country has a skateboarding scene somewhere, even where you think they might not.
Skateboarding's DIY ethos inspires a support culture that helps shape the scene.
Obviously there are tricks and it's good to be able to do those tricks well, but there's also space to be a filmmaker or a photographer or a ramp builder or a DIY concrete skate bar, a zine maker, a magazine publisher. It's an open space for people.
The Olympics saw this edgy, rebellious pursuit enter the mainstream. It's one of a number of attempts by the International Olympic Committee to appeal to a younger audience, and it could shape public perception of the sport.
It's something very relatable to those that don't skate, because everyone that doesn't skate has heard of the Olympics, whether they do sport or not. It's quite hard to ignore that. So putting it on that kind of platform is drawing attention to it as something legit.
Back at South Bank, skaters are mostly on board with the sport's new Olympic status.
People like keeping skateboarding as like the underground, how it was made, how it was born. But I think going into the mainstream as it is now, it's good, lots of money, people can make a living from it now.
I think a lot of skateboarders are annoyed because it's like supposedly killing off the culture, but in a way it's making the culture even bigger and it's just adding to it.
Other sports making their debut this year at the Games included surfing and sport climbing, and all three will return to the Olympics in Paris 2024. Mainstream or not, skateboarding looks set to grow. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
That's the news for today, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Stuart Lees. Thank you for watching our daily news show on YouTube. You can also watch our other programming on channel 190 on Sky TV or on Freeview via channel box on channel 271. In the meantime though, please give this video a like and hit subscribe to our channel. Have a good day.